How's it going, everyone? It's Mason Dozier here again with Kennesaw State ISA 4220 Fall Semester 2020, and today we're going to be talking about HTTPS and AppArmor. So we'll start off by talking about HTTP and HTTPS. I want to go ahead and go over HTTP before I begin talking about HTTPS to give you a better understanding of what HTTPS is and how it operates. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This is a web protocol that is sent between the user and another web page. This protocol runs on the application layer of the OSI model and sits on top of the TCP/IP protocols. So a little bit about TCP, the IP protocols. TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and it's used to maintain user to server connections, and the IP stands for Internet Protocol, and it ensures proper file delivery from server to user through the use of the Internet. So the TCP/IP protocols communicate through what's known as a three-way handshake. And what happens with this is a client system will send a synchronized packet to a server on the Internet. And then once that server receives this synchronized packet, the server will respond with a synchronized protocol as well, along with an acknowledgement packet. And then once the client system receives these two packets, the client system will respond back via TCP with an acknowledgement packet. And then once that's finished, then your connection is officially established. And this is how HTTP and this is how HTTP communicates with servers on the internet. Now that we know what HTTP is, let's talk about what HTTPS is. So HTTPS is just HTTP secure. Now the difference between HTTP and HTTPS is that HTTPS uses SSL protocols, and this HTTPS works on the application layer as well as the transport layer because SSL is what runs on the transport layer. And SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer, and this does a numerous number of things such as server authentication, message integrity, and it does both data and public key encryption. And so using this SSL, HTTPS is able to protect communications between a client and a server because it encrypts all the data being communicated through the connections, which is why it's considered the secure version. Now that we've gone over generally what HTTPS is, let's talk about some specific uses. For instance, Windows IIS. So IIS stands for Internet Information Services, and this is an extensible web server created by Microsoft for use with the Windows NT family. And this web server supports a wide variety of protocols and features. Some of the notable features that you might find on here is several different types of authentication methods, including anonymous authentication, basic access authentication, integrated Windows authentication, and some other ones. Some other notable features would be a centralized SSL certificate support system. It also has dynamic IP address restrictions, it has an enhanced logging system, and it has a bunch of other really good features to use. And now that we know what Windows IIS is, we can start talking about how to harden this. So always the first most basic hardening technique would be to install patches, server packs, and hotfixes. This goes for pretty much any software or application you're running on your system. This helps you keep bugs out of your system. It also helps fix any known vulnerabilities that have been patched through the updates. And it just helps your system run overall more smooth. Another simple tip is to disable any unused services. This just keeps your system running smoothly and helps keep it from getting bogged down. And then removing unused accounts, this is another simple one, and this really applies to the corporate world. Anytime you have an account on your system that's no longer being used, for instance, if an employee gets let go from the company, that becomes a risk if you leave it on your system because that employee may still have access to that account and they can access your system without you wanting them to. and so it's always a good idea to just keep any unused accounts removed from your system. Another tip is to restrict registry access. This keeps unwanted users from gaining access to the registry, or users that are not authorized to access the registry. And they can use that to exploit your system, or if an attacker gets into your system and they have a way of getting to that registry, then it makes it a whole lot easier for them to destroy your system and get information that you don't want them to have. So restricting access to this registry is always important. Another one is to disable Telnet. Now, Telnet's a kind of a technology from the past. It's not really used anymore, so if you're not planning on using it, which you're most likely not going to, it's a good idea to just go ahead and disable this feature. And you're also going to want to go ahead and disable NetBIOS as well. One really important tip is to log and audit failed login attempts. What this does is it ensures that your system administrator is aware of any failed login attempts that might indicate suspicious activity, and it helps prevent attacks. It just keeps your overall system more secure, and it's really important to audit these logs. Just having them enabled isn't enough. You got to make sure that you're paying attention to these logs so that you can catch any of these suspicious activity as quickly and efficiently as possible. Then some more basic tips, like we were talking about with HTTP and HTTPS. HTTP commonly runs through port 80, so you want to make sure that your HTTP is going through port 80, and then HTTPS, you want to make sure it's going through port 443. This keeps it from coming in through some less secure ports and keeps your system a little bit less exposed to threats. Continuing on with the hardening of Windows IIS, you don't want to download or you don't want to install or run your Windows IIS on the domain controller because there's no local accounts on that main controller. Another important tip is to implement the idea of least privilege. This keeps users from accessing areas of the system they do not have permission to access and limits system vulnerability. This basically just means that you're keeping users who may have access to your system from accessing parts of the system that they shouldn't be accessing. So you don't want someone who's just a general accountant accessing sensitive data on the company or people in the organization, because that could leave you exposed to vulnerabilities and threats. Another feature you're going to want to disable is anonymous access. You're only going to want to use authentication that is only anonymous when awarding server directory access and resources to users. Otherwise, you want to know who's being authenticated. And then you're also going to want to make sure that you do not allow anonymous rights. This ensures that users use an authentication method that is not anonymous before allowing them to actually upload content to your website. All right, moving on to another software that uses HTTPS, we're going to talk about Apache. So Apache is a free, open source, cross-platform web server software developed and maintained by an open community of developers under the name Apache Software Foundation. Now, Apache is most commonly ran on Linux distributions, but it also has versions for Windows and a wide variety of other Unix-like systems. And some of the notable features you might find in Apache is loadable dynamic modules. It's also very highly scalable, which means it can easily handle 10,000 plus simultaneous connections. It also features custom logging and user and session tracking. Now that we know what Apache is, let's talk about how to harden it. So the first tip would be to create separate sudo accounts for both the users and the groups. It's never really a good idea to have root access for both users and groups on a server, so making sure you have separate root access accounts is pretty important to keep making sure that your system stays secure. You're also going to want to restrict access to your server, which only allows certain IP addresses to view your website. This keeps any spam IP addresses from accessing the website and trying to attack it or download any malicious software. Another tip would be to review the DSO modules. These are used if you need extended capabilities. So if you're not planning on using these extended capabilities for your server, you should go ahead and disable these features. It's another way of keeping your system running a little bit smoother and giving less chances for an attacker to find a way into your system. You're also going to want to disable the trace enable feature. What the trace enable feature is it makes users' cookie information vulnerable to attack due to a program processing cross-site tracing issues. So you want to go ahead and disable that and just negate that vulnerability right away. You're also going to want to disable the server signature feature. This feature allows users to hide the version of Apache they are using, which makes it much harder. This feature actually shows you the version of Apache that the user is using. So disabling this allows the user to hide their version of Apache, which makes it much harder for attackers to penetrate the system. And then again, another common tip is to update regularly. That, like I said before, it goes with any software or operating system or application you're using on any system. You always want to stay as up to date as possible. Just keeps any bugs fixed on your system. It allows patches to be installed, and it just keeps known open vulnerabilities from being exploited by an attacker. Another good idea is to restrict directory access. You're going to want to configure the allow deny actions for directory access only, and by doing so you're keeping attackers who may have gained access to your system from being able to get to that directory and using it to exploit your system. Or it also keeps users who do have access to your system from who don't have permission to have directory access from getting access to that and accidentally or intentionally exploiting it on your system. This is a big one actually, secure Apache. So there's a couple ways to use a secure Apache. The first is mod_security function, and this allows traffic to be monitored in real time and acts as a web application firewall. This helps protect your system from several different ways that an attacker can take advantage of your system, and it just helps, once again, keep it secure and protected. And then the second way of using secure Apache is the mod_evasive function, and what this does is allows Apache to handle DOS, DDoS, and brute force attacks, which we all know can be pretty devastating if they do have a big effect on your system. And it also minimizes the damage that can be done by a DDoS attack, which, like I said, can be pretty devastating. So this is pretty important, especially when you're operating on the web. Alright, now that we've talked about HTTPS and some of the applications that use it, let's move on to AppArmor. So AppArmor is a kernel level subsystem that works by using a unique policy profile for each of the applications and services that you want to protect on your system. It is a Linux security module enhancement, and it uses mandatory access controls, which allows for comprehensive security policies to be written and implemented for the applications on your system. It also should be noted that AppArmor is confined and loaded to the kernel instead of the boot. AppArmor was initially unveiled with Ubuntu 7.04, and then it became the default as of Ubuntu 7.10 and all later versions, and is application specific. AppArmor features two modes. There's an enforce mode, which defines policies and report along with attempted policy violations, and then there's a complain mode which only reports policy violation attempts without enforcing the policy. AppArmor is a path-based program which was first included into the Linux kernel 2.6.36. It has profiles that are readily available and explicit binaries, and it also has gives the users the ability to create and add profiles to the etc directory. There's several ways to use the complain mode that I mentioned earlier. The first way is AA-complain, which keeps track of all violations by logging them into the system log. And then users can also use AA-enforce, which turns profiles into enforce mode, and these profiles can only be used alongside the AA-complain and AA-disable functions. And the AA-disable function is used to disable and unload profiles. Alright, now that we know a little bit about AppArmor and what it is and how it works, let's talk about how to harden it. Alright, the first tip for hardening would be to edit the bare minimum restrictions. Now, if you don't do this, then as you move along with your system and you get into using it, then the permissions could be prohibited from escalation and illicit information could be unintentionally shared or left vulnerable to attack. So it's important to go ahead and go through these bare minimum restrictions and edit them based on how you're going to use your system, how you're going to use AppArmor. Another tip is to monitor the apps and the frameworks that are under the AppArmor application. And by doing this, this allows the user to ensure that the right policies are being implemented and your system is secure. It also helps keep AppArmor from heeding regular operations for these apps that are that AppArmor is being used to secure. You're also going to want to use DNS crypt, and what this is, it allows encryption for all DNS requests, and it helps prevent attackers from being able to penetrate the file system, which would leave only the kernel vulnerable to attack. So it helps keep your file system secure, and it makes it harder for attackers to gain access to sensitive information in your system. Alright, and then last but not least, you're going to want to review the privileges on your profiles. So with AppArmor, your profiles can be found within the container as lxc.aa_profile. And users are going to want to avoid running the - privilege on containers that have AppArmor support. Instead of using that privilege, you're going to want to use, instead for these containers, users should run -security-opt, and what this does is it ensures that too many permissions are not given away, and it keeps your system from giving users you don't want to have access to certain areas it keeps them from gaining access to that area, and it just makes sure that users don't get permissions that you don't want them to have. And with that, that pretty much wraps up my presentation. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you next week.